Hello, my dears. I understand that this half of my face isn't really lit. It's really hot, and I'm not going to put on my lighting setup because my lighting setup is hot, and we don't need that today. So forgive me. Just appreciate this side of my face. I don't know. Anyway, before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick content warning. We're going to be talking about food issues, disordered eating, and eating disorders today. So if you struggle with any of those topics, but you want to watch one of my videos and support me, I really appreciate it. You can check out my video from last week on independence, which is over here. Anyway, so I probably don't have to tell you that autistic people tend to struggle with food, considering that the large portion of the population believes that autistic people only eat dinosaur chicken nuggets. A lot of autistic people are vegetarians, so they have to have dinosaur-shaped broccoli bites, so it's not entirely true. I'm only half kidding. Anyway, seriously, we tend to struggle with food, and it makes sense because meal times include multiple textures, smells, tastes, sounds, not to mention the whole table manners thing and the expectation to make small talk while handling sensory overload that is food. And also trying to sit like a normal human is extra hard when you have chronic pain. And on top of that, according to some people, it's not acceptable to eat the same food for every single meal, and so it's apparently important to try new things, and therefore you cannot predict what any of the smells, tastes, textures, and anything are going to be. Not to mention that even within one food, things don't always taste the same. For example, every single blackberry in a bowl can be a completely different taste and texture. We also typically have interoception issues, meaning that we can't always tell when we're hungry or thirsty, so we will just forget to eat meals. A lot. So how do we cope with this ever-changing world of food? Well, we have these things called same foods. Same foods are foods that we would eat all the time if we could because they are always sensory safe, no matter how much we don't want to eat in the moment, and they're specific to the individual. I know that I cannot sensorially handle many of my sister's same foods, and I know she doesn't like a lot of mine. Mine include mac and cheese, pasta, noodles, chicken nuggets, preferably dino-shaped, fresh fruits and veggies, plain chicken with rice and a vegetable, apple and peanut butter, and smoothies. Now, I'm lucky because I have a same food in every single food group, so I can eat a meal entirely of same foods and still get proper nutrition. I also get what I call food special interests because they work similarly to other special interests. They can also be called food phases, and basically, I will eat a food, I will really, really like it, and then it will be my number one same food for a certain amount of time before another one comes along to replace it. And then I forget about it, and then sometime later I remember that it exists, and then I get all excited and I eat it all the time again. The second part of coping is control. And this is where normal autistic eating behaviors and eating disorder behaviors overlap. Does that mean that every autistic person has an eating disorder? No, it just means that some behaviors that one would see in diagnosed eating disorders can also just be typical autistic eating behaviors. But because they look like eating disorder behaviors, people often think that they need to be fixed and are inherently bad. If they're getting in the way of things, then yes, but many of these things are just how we control some of the external factors at mealtimes in order to cope with all the bits that we cannot control. Some examples of this include lack of mealtime flexibility, using the same dishes and utensils, eating in a specific order, eating the same foods, and extreme anxiety if you can't, intense interest in nutrition, calorie counting, rigid thinking patterns about food, not letting food touch, etc. And again, these things may look bad to you, but they aren't inherently bad if they aren't causing extreme distress or health issues. First of all, nutrition could be a special interest for them, and you don't want to squash that. But also, in my case, for a few months, I ate the same thing for every single meal on the same plate at the same exact time every single day, and that could seem like an eating disorder, but it was actually the healthiest and most I've eaten in almost a year because of it. So don't judge a book by its cover. But all that being said, autistic people are more likely to develop eating disorders, which makes sense because A, we like control, and B, look at what our eating patterns already look like. I mean, it's not a far jump. And for parents, this does not mean to harass your child constantly about what they're eating, because for a lot of people that just makes it worse. We'll talk more about support later, but eating disorders tend to appear in people at high stress times of transition, especially when that coincides with a time of insecurity and feeling left out. So basically puberty. And the best thing that you can do is to just support us in times of stress and make things less stressful in any way you can. A key one, of course, would be to not tell your middle schooler that they'll never survive in the world only eating 5 foods and then forcing them to try a bunch of new foods every meal, because that's just not going to end well. But that is a later thing. We're talking about eating disorders. It's important to acknowledge that eating disorders are complex mental illnesses, so there's no one cause and there's no one solution. It's a combination of many factors. And the doctors in charge of eating disorder treatment know this, and they also know that eating disorders are more common with autism, and they also know that they're more common with people assigned female at birth. And guess what autistic population is the least likely to get diagnosed as autistic? Ding, 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 you're right, the system is a mess, and it's failing a huge portion of its population. Yay. But anyway, eating disorder treatment typically focuses on exposure therapy, which, as we learned in my ABA video, if someone isn't eating a food because it's sensory hell for them to put in their mouth, forcing them to eat it is not going to cure their bad relationship with food. It'll probably just make it worse. Eating disorder therapies for autistic people tend to be more focused on the root causes of the disorder, which is typically anxiety about loads of other stuff causing them to grab control wherever they can, which tends to be food. And frankly, I think regardless of neurotype, all therapies need to work this way and focus on the root causes of things, but I digress. Now, I'm not saying that eating disorder treatment is inherently bad, because it's not, and it can work for many autistic people. I'm just acknowledging that there are serious systemic issues, and I've had several friends come out of inpatient programs worse off than when they went in, and still not knowing for years afterwards that they are autistic, and then putting all the pieces together themselves. But today we're going to talk about a specific eating disorder that not a lot of people know about. I've had like 8 different classes in my life with units on anorexia and bulimia. We're not talking about that. I'm tired of reading about it. I'm tired of talking about it. We're talking about this one, and it's called ARFID. ARFID is a fun word, and it stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder, and it's characterized by a person avoiding certain foods, which results in restricted food intake. So basically picky eating on steroids, but also it's not really a choice. In my experience with ARFID, when I try to eat a food that my body doesn't want, I get the full body shakes every time I take a bite, and it's almost impossible to get enough to eat. And I cannot express how not fun that is. Not only in the moment, but it also makes me want to not eat the following meal, and you can just see how that snowballs. ARFID is most common in autists and ADHDers, and is also often paired with various anxiety disorders. I don't have much more to say about it other than letting you know that this is a thing, because I know that I felt much better when I found a word for it, because I knew I wasn't alone in this experience, and that I could then use said word to do research on how to make life better for myself. So I'm gifting that to you. Have at it. Okay, so the last part of this is how you can support us and or support yourself if this is your experience. And we'll begin with the obvious exposure therapy doesn't really work thing. Because the full body shakes are not caused by my anxiety about a food, they're caused by my body saying, this texture is physically painful, don't you dare get it anywhere near me ever again, and forcing yourself to eat the thing is not going to make that stop. It's going to make you traumatized and permanently repulsed by that food and never want to eat it again. So that's just not really a productive thing. So let's not do that. But second of all, if something like nutrition or exercise or veganism or calorie counting or whatever in that category is a special interest, don't shut it down. Just help us to moderate it, which may include teaching us some stuff. For example, I have a friend who was really into calorie counting until she learned that calories don't measure nutrition and more or less don't matter as a unit of measurement, and then she moved on to a special interest in nutrition because that did matter, and now she's eating super great. I also know somebody else who was somehow pivoted. I still don't know how their parents did this. Bless you. They were somehow pivoted from a weight watching, number counting special interest to cooking, and now they're a professional chef. Now, again, please support initial special interests, but if that special interest starts to become toxic, you can help to pivot it a little bit to something in a nearby area that is less toxic. And also, don't tease us. Yes, we might eat the same thing for every meal. For a lot of people, the fact that they're eating a meal at all is a big deal. So don't make us feel worse about it, please. That's not cool. Also, eating disorders aren't choices, and they're not easy to overcome. So let's just not judge other people for what they're eating. Let's just not do that. And I might mention that because of this, it's sometimes difficult for me when somebody I don't know super well says, "Hey, want to go grab some lunch?" or something like that, because I have a lot of anxiety about eating around other people. I mean, what if I don't like the food? What if it's a bad texture? What if they judge me for what I'm eating? It's a whole cycle. Not to mention the whole, I'm vaguely allergic to everything, so what if I can't actually eat anything at the place we go to? How am I going to deal with that? So if we could all just normalize eating before going to things and or letting people to decide to meet not at meal times, that would be super great. And this also includes giving alternative options like eating in a classroom instead of the cafeteria, or getting takeout instead of eating in a restaurant. Both for people with digestion issues and those with eating disorders, we thank you. Speaking of digestion issues, as you might remember from my FODMAP video, which is linked over there, that autistic people are more likely to have digestion issues, be that IBS or the other ones. So that's something to keep in mind, because it could also have something to do with various eating issues. It's also important to be chill with us eating the same things. If we're nutritionally doing okay and getting enough to eat, there's nothing wrong with it. As I mentioned earlier, I ate chicken, rice, and vegetables for nearly every lunch and dinner when I was at school, and I was honestly the healthiest that I've ever been. And when I moved home and I had to eat not the same thing for every single meal, I just started skipping meals, and I really struggled at mealtimes again. So I started cooking the same 2 or 3 things and went right back to the way that I was when I was at school. So that was a really good solution for me. That being said, trying new foods is important, unfortunately. So how do you do that? How do you go about that? And the best way to do it is to do a very, very teensy bit at a time. So instead of chicken, rice, and green beans, you do chicken, pasta, and green beans, or some other iteration. There are entire mommy blogs devoted to specific ways on how to substitute new foods that are similar textures to slowly get a kid to liking a new texture over a period of like months. It's honestly quite interesting, and it's also a really great resource if you need it. So I will try to find a couple of those, and I will put them in the description for you. But anyway, when trying new foods, it's important that there is no pressure to like it. There's this whole tough cookie parenting thing. Feels very 1940s, where they're like, this is the only thing that you can have for dinner, and you're gonna sit at this table until you eat it to make the kid try a new thing. And 9 times out of 10 in that situation, I would just say I wasn't hungry and skip the meal. If it was, try a scoop of this new thing along with the rest of your typical food, I might actually really like the thing and happily choose to have it for dinner, or not, but either way, if I don't like it, that's okay. And that goes for general food variety as well. If I have the option to change it up, I will willingly do it every now and then, when I want to and when I can handle it. But if somebody else thrusts that upon me, I'm going to freeze up and end up eating nothing at all. And last but not least, have our staples around. We always have some chicken and rice in my fridge, we always keep apples on the counter and peanut butter in the cupboard, and we move the blender to where I can safely reach it so I can make smoothies whenever I want to. That way, if I'm having a hard time with food one day, I always have one of my same foods available so I can still get enough to eat and not feel like a trash can, which is always ideal. But anyway, that is all of the things. I hope that this could help you in some way to understand any of the topics in this video. Reminder that I'm in no way a doctor. I'm a 19-year-old psychology student. Don't take medical advice from me. And thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. Remember, your story isn't over. It has only just begun. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.